Alright guys, welcome to another episode of Rotors, the most anticipated video that we have for you guys. This is part 1 of 5 parts on our porting videos. Today we're going to show you guys how to port the secondary port on your 13B 4-port engine. Now, if you guys are freehanding your ports, which we highly recommend that you don't, for the Streetport video we picked up the Mazda-Trix large Streetport template, and I'm going to show you guys exactly how Mazda-Trix sets out their port compared to others that you may have seen on the internet or other templates you can purchase. We prefer the Mazda-Trix one for their Streetport because of the way they have it set up with port timing, opening and closing. We'll go over those specs and details as well. Now everybody's always talking about, oh, you got to square the corner or square the top. Well, you can do it rounded. It's not going to be an issue unless you actually break into the point. We marked it with a black dot. That's right where the side seal is riding. Now if you open it up this way in this direction and you go up, the side seal will dip in and catch the top of the port while closing and break off the edge of the side seal. Now we marked out where the side seal sits on an old corner seal. If you guys are taking apart your engine, look at your old corner seals. You're going to see where the side seal wore a notch into the corner seal. We use that as reference where the side seal sits on the corner. And then we mark them with a permanent marker. And then of course we go directly across. Now when it comes to porting, the corner seal doesn't necessarily sit all the way up there like you would think. The reason is because on the rotor, the corner seal sits not directly at the top or at the tip. It's actually 2.5 or 2.5 millimeters in from the top of the corner seal from the top of the rotor. Now on the iron, you can actually see this gap or this space between the corner seal and the top of the apex seal, and that's this brown path that you can see go all the way around the rotor here. Now what we did was we took a 3 millimeter apex seal spring because it measures exactly 2.5 millimeter, and you can run it all the way around and see exactly the space where the corner seal is from the housing itself. It sits about right there. Now if you port over and up and back, it'll open up the port and it'll cause the side seal to fall down in there because of the spring pressure on it will actually push it into the porthole. So the Mazda-Trix port template, if you lay it on here, Mazda-Trix port template just goes up and then over. It stays away from the whole path of the side seal, which is the reason why we like to use the Mazda-Trix templates. Other templates out there, you'll see that they'll widen them up and then they'll go down. Well, those to us is not the correct way. If you start to go down, you're going to start to get overlap. Now overlap is where the intake port and the exhaust port are open at the exact same time. So you're going to get fuel and air mixed in with exhaust gases, and that's what makes the brap noise and the cool noise that everybody likes. And the reason why a bridge doesn't have low end power is because at the low RPMs both ports are open at the same time, which makes loss of power, which is the reason why low end bridges suck. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mark out the port mark out the template on the iron itself. You guys are probably still wondering about the whole overlap, or what about the exhaust ports. The exhaust ports is going to come into another section or another part in our series of videos here. But if you are at the point right now you are doing the exhaust ports, port down, don't port up. If you port up and then you port your intake down, you're just creating much more opening gap between the two ports. If you're like, yeah, I want the brap this, brap that, great. You can have all the braps. And then anything under 3,000 RPM, you'll have all the no powers. Now we usually mark them with a permanent marker, fine tip, real sharp, so we can get in there. Okay, now that we marked it out, you're going to see that the Mazda Tricks port still leaves a fine gap for the side seal to ride on, so it doesn't fall into the port. Now where the side seal sits, we actually have it measured and marked with this little black dot. And then you can see the gap between the port and where the side seal rides. Okay, now Mazda Tricks, the port template, it does go in just a little bit. Now what this does is on the back side here, when you're looking at your iron, you're going to see that there's a step or a lip inside this runner, and you want to get rid of that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get some tape. And what we do is we tape around the port itself just in case the Dremel or the porting bit slips. It'll actually catch and tear up the tape instead of run a spotted line across your iron, which you'll see in amateur port work. Alright, now that it's all taped up, we are using a Dremel, 3000 Dremel. I'm using an extension on it, and then we're also using a Carbide Bit. Now this is to get the whole outline done, and we will come back and finish it with fine sandpaper on the Dremel as well. Alright. Okay, now that we use the rough cut and then we use the rough sandpaper, if you notice that step lip is gone. And then the port is definitely much bigger. And now with the fine sandpaper, what we're going to do is we're going to straighten this top, give this a little bit more round, and then clean everything up. Now if you can tell that our black dot right where the side seal meets the corner seal is still sitting in the same spot and is untouched and won't touch our port. Alright, now that we switched over to a finer grit sandpaper, we're going to finish off by squaring off this top, smoothing the port out. Now the runner, you can smooth the runner out, but I don't necessarily say let's port the runner unless you plan on porting the intake as well. Because if you port the runner and then you leave the intake stock, you're going to end up giving yourself a step down from the transition from the intake to the iron. It's going to slow down the velocity and you're not going to gain from it. So porting the runner and leaving the intake stock, not a good idea. If you plan on just leaving the intake stock and not porting, then I suggest mainly leaving the runner, just smooth it out and leave it at that. Okay, now that the port has been smooth, the lip is gone, what I usually do is I take the Dremel at a nice angle, just run across this top lip to make sure there's no burrs or anything that can catch oil control rings. Okay, now that you can see that we took care of the lip that was in here, and there was also a small casting lip right here as well. Not every iron is casted the same. You should be able to tell when you grab your front iron and your rear iron, or front side housing and rear side housing. Look at both of them. They're not going to be casted the same. You need to make sure that you get all the casting bumps or lips out, and then it's always best to use a template. Like I said, I prefer the Mazda-Trix one because Mazda-Trix, you know, they took a lot of effort, a lot of measurements to make sure that the port doesn't get the side seal. Then you can also see our dot where we measured ourselves isn't going to run into the port at all. Now I've showed this port before, and I've had everybody like, oh, that's a side seal leader, and I mean, can you honestly tell the measurements from a Facebook picture with your eyeballs? If so, RoboCop, I applaud you. But in this case, you can see in the measurements as well, it's not going to touch the side seals. Now this specific engine, we're not really going to do the runners, only because the customer isn't going to do the intake or anything to actually match it all up. So there's not really going to be any gain by doing the runners. Most of the gain is just going to be the port itself. And that concludes our first episode of porting. Expect much more in-depth details. We have semi-peripheral engines come in. We got full bridges and half bridges as well. And then we also have engines where we're going to expand the runner down to match an RE intake. So you're gonna see that as well. This, however, is the first part, most basic to understand, template, what two tools were needed to basically get it done. And that is it. Thanks for watching.